Does plaid make you mad? With a little advanced planning, you can have beautiful, straight, and continuous plaid borders on your quilts. I'm Kathy Wiley, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to match plaids on quilt borders. It's done by dividing the borders into 8 sections. Here's how. You will need to know the finished width of your quilt, the finished length, and the finished width of the border. My quilt is 28 inches wide, 40 inches long, and my border is 3 inches wide. To calculate the length of the top and bottom borders, take the quilt width and add 2 times the border width. For my quilt, that will be 28 inches plus 2 times 3 inches, or 28 plus 6, which equals 34 inches. To calculate the length of the side borders, take the quilt length and add 2 times the border width. For my quilt, that will be 40 inches plus 2 times 3 inches, or 40 plus 6, which equals 46 inches. Now we want to divide these borders in half. The top and bottom borders will be half the quilt width on one side, 28 inches divided by 2, which is 14 inches, and half the border length on the other side, 34 inches divided by 2, which is 17 inches. The side borders will be half the quilt length on one side, 40 inches divided by 2, which is 20 inches, and half the border length on the other side, 46 inches divided by 2, which is 23 inches. The border segments will have a straight line for the seam in the middle of the border and a 45-degree diagonal line for the miter seam in the corners. You might find it helpful to make pattern pieces for these 8 border segments. I drew mine on flip chart paper from the office supply store and labeled each piece. TL for top left, TR for top right, BL for bottom left, BR for bottom right, LT for left top, LB for left bottom, RT for right top, and RB for right bottom. Now here is the key. Choose an easy to find location on the plaid and position the outer tip of the miter seam at that point. It will help if it is along a stripe. I chose this tiny white square at the center of this large block of intersecting stripes. You will need to place all 8 pattern pieces to point at this exact same location on the plaid. As I was positioning the pattern pieces on my fabric, I noticed that the plaid was a bit skewed. So, I lined up the outer edge with the lengthwise stripe and marked guidelines for the crosswise stripes. Then I nudged the fabric so the crosswise stripes would be square to the lengthwise stripes and pinned both sides. Use a rotary cutter and ruler to cut out the border pieces, adding a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides. I also marked the cross seam and miter seam on the fabric with a white fabric marker. Repeat for all 8 border pieces. Now we'll sew the border halves back together again. The plaid pattern will match lengthwise, but it will be a coincidence if the pattern matches crosswise. This is to be expected, but it will be very unobtrusive. Another tip, I find it easier to pattern match the stripes by appliquing the seam rather than piecing it by machine, because I'm working from the front and I can see both sides of the seam as I'm sewing. But it's up to you. Now sew the borders onto the quilt in the usual manner, starting and stopping the seams a 1/4 inch from each end. Sew the miter seams, and again, I like to do this by hand with an applique stitch. And there you have it. The plaid matches perfectly in all 4 corners. You can practice this technique using my Tartan Toques pattern and the Tartan Traditions collection from Northcott.